Photoshop on your iPad gives you access to Photoshop's core tools and features in a modern interface designed for a touchscreen. Let's take a look at where the essential features are and learn some of the touch gestures that you'll use as you work in Photoshop on your iPad. On the left side of the screen is the toolbar. It contains some of the commonly used tools found in Photoshop on the computer. Tap a tool to activate it. If that tool has options, it opens the Tool Options bar. In the Tool Options bar, you have an icon for each option. For example, here's an icon for brush size, and when I tap that, I can adjust the brush size. You can move the Tool Options bar anywhere else on the screen by pressing on its handle and dragging. You can even drag it onto the toolbar, and it docks itself there. If a tool has a small caret at the bottom right, like this Selection tool, that means it has alternate tools behind it, and you can access those by long pressing on the tool or double tapping the tool, and then select the tool that you want. At the bottom of the screen are the foreground and background color chips. The foreground color chip controls the color used by any tool that applies color, like the brush tool. You can switch these two chips by just swiping down or up on the color chips, and you can select a color by tapping the foreground color chip and selecting a color in the color picker, or you can use the eyedropper tool located above the color chips. You may have noticed that there's no zoom tool or hand tool like there is in Photoshop on a computer. That's because on a touchscreen, you use gestures to zoom and pan around an image. To zoom, use a 2-finger pinch or a 2-finger spread. If you want to put the image back to fit on screen view, then tap the Move tool and with 1 finger, double tap the image. Another way to zoom is to scrub over the zoom indicator in the title bar. Down at the bottom left of the screen is the innovative Touch shortcut, which is a great shortcut for quickly accessing additional tool functions. For example, I have the Move tool selected, and if I select the layer that contains the dino bird, I can just click and drag and move the dino bird freely. But what if I want to move the dino bird only left to right in a straight line? Then I'll press and hold on the Touch shortcut, and I'll drag, and now the movement of the dino bird is constrained. And up at the top right, you can see a blue tooltip that tells you what the Touch shortcut is doing. If I slide my finger to the outer ring of the Touch shortcut, now the function changes to Duplicate Layer, and so if I drag the dino bird, that gives me a second dino bird. Now let's take a look at the Layers panel. Layers, of course, are an essential feature in Photoshop on any device. On the iPad, you have 2 views of the Layers panel. Right now you're looking at the compact view, which is that vertical line of thumbnails. Each thumbnail is a separate layer in the file. To see the more detailed view, go to the bar on the far right, which is the taskbar, and tap the second icon there. The detailed view is useful when you're working with layer masks or when you need to see layer names. To switch back to compact view, tap the top button in the taskbar. If you want to see the properties of a layer, make sure the layer you want to affect is selected, and then tap the third icon in the taskbar. And here in the layer properties, you can impact the opacity of the layer, the blend mode of a layer, which affects the way that layer blends with the layers below it, and more. There are more icons in the center of the taskbar that are related to layers. For example, to add a new layer or a new adjustment layer, long press the plus icon in the taskbar. And there's a 3-dot menu with many other layer-related options for you to explore. I'll tap the Layer Properties icon again to close the Layer Properties panel. Let's take a quick look at the top right, where you'll find an Undo button and a Redo button. Each time you tap one of those, you go back or forward 1 step in time. If you want to export or share your document to another location, tap the Share icon at the top right, and tap the question mark icon at the top right if you have questions about how Photoshop on your iPad works. There you'll find a list of gestures that you can use with Photoshop on your iPad, a list of shortcuts you can use with the Touch Shortcut feature, and a list of shortcuts you can use if you have a keyboard attached to your iPad. So that's an overview of the basic layout of Photoshop on your iPad. Great new features are being added all the time, so continue to explore the interface to find even more.
The touch shortcut in Photoshop on your iPad is a great way to streamline your workflow because it lets you quickly access additional features. This can be especially useful if you're not using a keyboard with your iPad. Let's check this out. I have the brush tool active in the toolbar, and I'm just going to come in and paint a stroke over the sky. Now, with the brush tool still active, I can press and hold on the touch shortcut in the lower left, and it lets me erase without having to come out to the toolbar and choose another tool. When you're using a tool with the touch shortcut pressed down, you'll see a blue label in the upper right that tells you what the shortcut action is with the selected tool. The function of the touch shortcut is active as long as you keep it pressed down. If you move your thumb or finger to the outer part of the touch shortcut, you can access the secondary function for the active tool. With the brush tool, this lets me use the eyedropper to sample color from the image. So as I'm pressing down on the outer ring of the touch shortcut, I'm going to come over and tap on the clouds to the left of the ship to sample that color and place it into the foreground color chip. Now I can release the touch shortcut and paint with that color just to suggest that there's a little bit more fog obscuring the ship. By default, the touch shortcut is located in the lower left, but you can drag it anywhere on screen that makes sense for how you like to use the app. The touch shortcut is not just for changing the behavior of the active tool. It also works with other features. For example, you can use it as a quick way to select multiple layers. In this composite, the ship is on one layer, and its reflection is on another layer underneath. No matter what tool is active in the toolbar, I can use the touch shortcut to select multiple layers. I'll tap on the ship layer to make it active, and I'll come and press and hold on the touch shortcut, and now I can tap on the thumbnail of the reflection layer underneath to add that to the selection. And you can see that they're both selected from the blue outline around the thumbnails. I'll release the touch shortcut, and now with both the ship and its reflection layer selected, I'll choose the Move tool at the top of the toolbar, and now I can move both layers together and reposition them in the image. We've only covered a couple of examples for how you might use the touch shortcut. There are a lot of ways that you can take advantage of this very useful feature. If you tap the Help menu in the upper right corner, you can view a list of the available touch shortcuts. Once you get used to how it works, the touch shortcut can be an effective way to speed things up and easily access common functions in Photoshop on your iPad.
When you launch Photoshop on your iPad, it opens to the home screen, which shows you thumbnails of your recent documents and offers some options for where to start your workflow. One option is to start work by opening a new blank file. To do that, you would tap the Create New option at the bottom of the screen. Then, in Photoshop on your iPad, you could add other documents to the canvas using the Place Image tool, as you'll see how to do later in this tutorial. A second option is to start work on your iPad by importing an image from another location. To do that, you would tap the Import and Open option, and then you choose the source of the file, which could be your camera roll, a file storage location you use, or your iPad's camera. A third option, and the one we're going to focus on in this tutorial, is to start by opening a cloud document. The first question you probably have is, what's a cloud document? Cloud documents are your Photoshop documents saved in Adobe's cloud. What makes cloud documents so useful is that you can see them and work on them whether you're using Photoshop on your computer or Photoshop on your iPad. To see all your cloud documents on your iPad, tap the Cloud Documents option on the left side of the home screen. That opens your Cloud Documents Organizer, where each of the thumbnails is already a cloud document. Tap one of the cloud documents to open it in Photoshop on your iPad. This is a Photoshop document, a .psd file that already has 2 layers. To bring in another document on a third layer, tap the Place Image tool in the toolbar. Here you can see the various sources from which you can bring in a document. I'll choose the camera roll on my iPad. In the camera roll, I'll navigate to the photo that I want to bring in, and I'll select it. And that returns me to Photoshop on the iPad in transform mode, where I could scale, rotate, and move this new document. But it looks like it's a pretty good fit as is, so I'm just going to tap Done to exit transform mode. To finish up this composite, I'll apply a layer blending mode to the selected layer of the dancer. In the taskbar on the far right, I'll tap the Layer Properties icon, and in the Layer Properties panel, I'll tap the Blend Mode menu, and I'm going to choose the Multiply Blend Mode, which hides the white background around the dancer against the colors on the layers below. Now, if you're an experienced Photoshop user, at this point you may be looking around for a Save button. But here's the important take-home point about Photoshop on the iPad. There is no Save button, and that's because every image is automatically and regularly saved to Adobe's cloud every few minutes while you're working on it in Photoshop on the iPad. And that means you don't have to worry about saving, and it means you'll always have access to an up-to-date file wherever you're working in Photoshop, whether that's on your iPad or on your computer. Whether you go idle, flip to another app, or head back to the home screen, your documents are automatically saved. When you are done with this editing session, tap the Home button at the top left, and that will take you back to the Cloud Documents Organizer where you started. The Cloud Documents Organizer helps you manage and organize all your cloud documents. At the top right, you can use the view icons to change your view of your cloud documents. You can use the Sort menu at the left to change the way your cloud documents are sorted in the Cloud Documents Organizer. You can even create a folder by tapping the folder icon at the top right, and then you can drag cloud documents into the folder to organize them. If you tap the three-dot menu under a thumbnail, as I'm going to do down here at the bottom right, you can find the actions that you can take on that cloud document, including deleting it from the Cloud Document Organizer. I'll tap Delete there to delete this image of the pink sunset. If you do delete an image from the Cloud Document Organizer, you have a safety net. To show you that, I'll tap Deleted over on the left. And now we can see all the cloud documents that I've deleted over time, including, down at the bottom, that pink sunset that I just deleted. And I can restore any of these. I'll tap the three-dot menu under the pink sunset image, and here I can choose to either permanently delete it or restore it. I'll tap Restore. Now when I tap back on Cloud Documents on the left, to return to my Cloud Documents Organizer, you can see the pink sunset document safely restored to my Cloud Document Organizer. So that's how to start your workflow and how to work with cloud documents in Photoshop on your iPad. You can create anything you can imagine by combining images into unique composites in Photoshop, and the iPad is a great place to do that. In this video, we'll see how to make a technically simple but effective composite in Photoshop on your iPad, exploring how to use layers to work with separate elements in a composite. I'll start by taking a look at the Layers panel, and I can see right away that there's some content that's hidden from view. That's the woman on the layer at the bottom of the layer stack. So I'm going to change the layer stacking order. To do that, I'll tap on the woman layer to select it, and then I'll press and hold that layer and drag up above the next layer in the layer stack, and the woman appears in the image. Next, let's bring another element into this composite. I'll go to the toolbar and I'll tap the Place Image tool. And I'm going to tap Camera Roll. In the Camera Roll, I'll navigate to the photo that I want to bring in. And when it appears in Photoshop on the iPad, I'm automatically in transform mode. So I can press any of the corner anchor points and drag inward to resize the document proportionately. I'll press inside the bounding box and drag to move it approximately where I want it, and then I'll press the rotate handle, which is hanging down from the bottom of the document, and I'll rotate it, and I'll tap Done. The next thing I want to do is knock out the black background around the large dolphin that I just brought in. In the Layers panel, I'll make sure that only the layer that I just brought in is selected, and then I'll go to the taskbar and tap Layer Properties. And in the Layer Properties panel, I'll tap the Blend Mode menu, and I'll scroll down to the Screen Blend Mode and select that one. The Screen Blend Mode knocks out the darker parts of the dolphin layer and leaves only the lighter parts. I'll close Layer Properties. Now with the Move tool selected, I'll press and drag to move the dolphin exactly where I want him in the image. As the number of layers in a document grows, it's a good idea to group your layers to organize them. To do that, you have to select multiple layers. So let's see how that's done. I'll tap the top layer that I want to include in my layer group. Then I'll go to the taskbar and tap the three-dot menu there, and I'll choose Begin Multi-Select Mode. That adds a checkbox to each of the layer thumbnails. In Detailed Layer View, that checkbox is to the left of the thumbnails. Now I'll just tap the checkbox on each layer that I want to add to my layer group. And to make the layer group, I'll tap the folder icon that appears in the taskbar. You can see that those 3 layers are now grouped together. If I double tap them, that opens the layer group and lets me see them. And then I can tap the back arrow to go back and see all my layers and this layer group. So now that you know how to add images to a composite and how to work with them using layers and layer groups in Photoshop on your iPad, try making some layered composites of your own. Choose images that look like they'll go together in terms of content, lighting, and color, and use the layer techniques that you learned here to combine them. Sometimes all you need is a single image from which you can make a composite. Let's give it a try with this photo. What I'm going to do is select one of these balloons and make a copy of it. I'll go to the toolbar and I'll long press or double tap the lasso selection tool. And from the flyout menu, I'm going to choose the Quick Select tool. My tool options are docked to the bottom of the toolbar, and you'll see there that the top icon, the Add to Selection icon, is selected. So that means that I can use this tool to drag over the large balloon, I can release my finger, and then I can add to that selection by dragging over the little basket at the bottom. So now that I have the balloon and the basket selected, I'm going to go over to the right side of the screen and tap the 3-dot menu in the taskbar, and there I'm going to choose Copy. Then I'll tap Deselect to make the marching ants disappear. I'll tap the 3-dot menu again, and this time I'll choose Paste. And that creates a new layer that has just a copy of the selected balloon, and you can see that in the Layers panel. Now I'll tap the Move tool, and with the top layer, the layer with the balloon selected in the Layers panel, I'll click and drag to move the copy of the balloon. I'll tap the Transform tool in the toolbar to make that smaller so it looks like it's in the distance, and I'll drag any of the corner anchor points, and that allows me to scale the image down proportionally. And then I can press inside of this bounding box and drag to position it wherever I want it. And then I'll tap Done at the top of the image. So that's an overview of how to use selection tools and their options, along with ideas about how you can make a simple composite from a single image here in Photoshop on your iPad. Knowing how to use layer masks is an important skill if you want to make great-looking composites, either here in Photoshop on your iPad or in Photoshop on your computer. And the good news is that layer masking works the same way on both of these surfaces. It's just a matter of getting to know where the various features are. So here in Photoshop on the iPad, I'm starting with a simple document that has 2 layers. It has this bride image on the top, and if I make that invisible, you can see that there's a forest image on the bottom of the layer stack. What I'd like to do is hide part of the bride layer so we can see down through to some of the forest on the layer below. So start by making sure that the top layer is selected, then go to the taskbar and tap the mask icon. That adds a new empty layer mask to the bride layer. The white thumbnail that you see in the Layers panel is that layer mask. Next, we're going to brush with black on the layer mask to hide part of the bride layer. Select the Brush tool in the toolbar. In the Tool Options bar, the color chips should be black and white because we're working on a layer mask. With black as the foreground color, I'm going to brush, and wherever I brush on the layer mask on the bride layer, I'm hiding part of the bride layer so we can see down through to the forest on the layer below. The big advantage of using a layer mask to do this, as opposed to, say, selecting something and cutting it out, is that layer masks don't make permanent changes to the image. For example, if I brush somewhere that I didn't mean to, and I hide part of the bride layer that I'd like to bring back into view, all I have to do is go to the Tool Options bar for the Brush tool and swipe up on the color chips to make white the foreground color, and then brush over part of the area of the bride that I'd hidden. so all the changes I make with layer masks are always editable. If you ever want a closer view of your layer mask, just double-tap the layer mask thumbnail in the Layers panel. Now you can more clearly see the black on the mask that's hiding the corresponding part of the bride layer, and the white on the mask that's showing part of the bride layer. I'll double-tap again on that layer mask thumbnail to go back to the normal view. You always want to be aware of whether you're working on the layer mask or on the image that's on the layer, so that you get the results that you want. Here in Compact View of the Layers panel, you can switch from the layer mask to the actual layer by swiping side to side on the layer mask thumbnail. To switch from the layer mask to the layer, I'll swipe left to right on the layer mask thumbnail. And to go back to the layer mask, I'll swipe from right to left. So far, we've been working in Compact Layers View. If you prefer to work with layer masks in Detailed Layers View, where they look more like they do in Photoshop on the computer, then tap the Detailed Layer View icon in the taskbar. Now you can see the layer mask thumbnail on the right side of the bride layer and the layer thumbnail on the left side of the bride layer. The blue highlight indicates which thumbnail is active. Make sure your mask thumbnail is highlighted. In either Compact or Detailed Layers View, you can delete a layer mask altogether without harming the image itself. To do that, with the layer mask thumbnail selected, tap the three-dot menu in the taskbar and choose Delete Mask. If you're just getting started with layer masking, those are the basics of layer masking in Photoshop on your iPad. Practice these techniques a few times on different images and you'll get the hang of it. If you already have experience using layer masks in Photoshop on the computer, here's some additional information you may appreciate about using layer masks in Photoshop on your iPad. For one thing, just like in Photoshop on your computer, you can create a layer mask from a selection on the iPad. Let's switch back to Compact Layers View, select one of the selection tools, and make a selection. Here it will be easiest to select over the dark corners, so I'll drag over those with the Quick Selection tool. Down at the bottom of the screen, there's now the Selection Tool Actions bar, which appears whenever you have a selection active. I'll invert my selection by tapping Invert in that bar. And now, let's make this into a layer mask by going to the taskbar and tapping the mask icon. Then you can use the brush tool to fine-tune the mask by brushing on it with black. Another technique for experienced users is to try brushing with lowered brush opacity for a semi-transparent look like this. So that's a look at layer masking in Photoshop on the iPad that I hope you find useful, whether you're new to layer masking or whether you're used to doing it already in Photoshop on your computer. In this tutorial, you'll learn how to work with adjustment layers in a composite in Photoshop on your iPad. In this example, I'm going to start with this layered file, and I'm going to turn it into this composite with just a couple of adjustment layers. Let's start by seeing how to create an adjustment layer with a mask in Photoshop on the iPad. I want to change the color of the rain boots in the bottom layer by applying a hue saturation adjustment layer. I'm going to turn off the top layer by tapping the eye icon in the taskbar on the right. Then I'm going to select the layer that contains the boots so that the adjustment layer I'm about to make will come into the layer stack right above it. And then I'm going to make a selection of the rain boots so that the adjustment layer I'm going to make will affect only the rain boots and not the entire boots layer. I'll press and hold the lasso tool in the toolbar to view all the selection tools, and I'll tap on the Quick Select tool, the second tool, and then move into the image and drag over one boot, and then drag over the other boot to add that one to the selection. If there's a little bit extra selected as well, I'll go to the Options bar for the Quick Select tool, and I'll tap the second icon, and then I'll just brush over the area that I want to remove from this selection. Great! Now let's add an adjustment layer. To do that, I'll go over to the taskbar on the right, and I'll press and hold the plus icon. In the flyout menu, I'll tap Adjustment Layer. That brings up a menu of the kinds of adjustments that are currently available in Photoshop on the iPad. So I'm going to tap the Hue Saturation adjustment layer, and if you take a look at the Compact Layers panel that I'm using, you can see that there's now a new layer that's displaying a black and white mask. Notice also that the Layer Properties panel opened with controls for the selected adjustment layer. I'm going to use the hue control, dragging it to the left to change the color of the boots. To help you understand why only the boots changed color, I'll double-click the layer mask on the hue saturation adjustment layer to show it in the document. On the layer mask, the area that I'd selected is white, and it's revealing the hue adjustment. The area that I didn't select is black, and it's hiding the hue adjustment. I also want this hue saturation adjustment to affect the reflection of the boots in the puddle. To do that, I'm going to use another method, brushing on the layer mask with white to show more of the adjustment. In the toolbar, I'll tap the brush tool. In the brush tool options, I'm going to switch the foreground color to white by swiping down on that black color chip. And I'm going to use a big and soft brush to brush over the reflection of the boots in the layer mask. And the hue change now appears on the reflection of the boots too. Now let's take a look at how and why to clip an adjustment layer to a content layer. I'll select the rowboat layer in the Compact Layers View panel, and then I'll go over to the taskbar on the right and I'll tap the eye icon to bring that layer back into view. If you're following along, you'll get the best results with the technique I'm about to show you if you're working with images like mine, a top layer that has a light background, the water around the rowboat, and a bottom layer with a darker image. I'd like to blend the surrounding water into the boots image. To do that, I'll try applying a blend mode. I'll go over to the Layer Properties panel, and I'll tap the Blend Mode menu, and from there I'll choose the Multiply Blend Mode and then tap off the menu. Now the Multiply Blend Mode usually hides white pixels from view when they're on top of darker pixels, but some of the surroundings of this rowboat aren't pure white, so they're still showing a bit. I think I can take care of this problem by using a Levels adjustment layer to push those pixels to pure white so that they'll blend in when the Multiply Blend Mode is applied to them. But here's the important part. I don't want to apply a Levels adjustment to all the layers, the boots and the rowboat. I just want to apply this Levels adjustment layer to the rowboat layer. So I'll go over to the Layer Properties panel and tap Add Clipped Adjustment. And then I'll tap Levels as the type of adjustment layer. And that both creates a new adjustment layer as well as clips that adjustment layer to the layer right below it, the rowboat layer. The small bent arrow on the new adjustment layer in the Layers panel indicates that that adjustment layer is now clipped. So when I go over to the Layer Properties panel and I make a change there, my change will affect only the rowboat layer. I'm going to change this Levels adjustment by dragging the white slider to the left, and as I do so, you can see that the water surrounding the rowboat is now blending in nicely with the layer below. So that's a look at adjustment layers, adjustment layer masks, and clipped adjustment layers in Photoshop on your iPad.